what I wanted to do was work with young people. I've been working as a coach in Birmingham City Amateur Boxing club because I didn't have the eyesight to box myself in the end, so I became a coach there. And I really wanted to work with young people, so I started looking around for jobs, found the youth work job, rang them up, and they said that to become a youth worker you needed a qualification. And I decided to inquire into that, and I found out that you had to go to university for 2 years to get a diploma in youth and community work, and you had to go for 3 years to get a degree in community and youth work. And I didn't think I had a chance of being able to achieve that, but I was a bit of a chancer, and I decided to go for it. And I went for the interview, and I went the mature students entry at West Hill College in Selly Oak in Birmingham. And I remember they gave me a scene question. I had to write an exam, and I remember I just really went for it. I sat through the exam and I just kept on writing and writing and writing, and you'd need to have been a forensic scientist to have made sense of the answer I gave on the question. I couldn't understand it, and to this day I'm not sure why they actually let me in based on the exam question, but I think I interviewed very well, and I think they could see that I was a genuine guy, and that I really cared about people, and that I cared about the young people, and that I really, really wanted to be a youth worker. So they let me in. The first couple of weeks I thought they were going to throw me out. I couldn't. I could see the blackboard this time because I was wearing glasses, but I just couldn't understand what was going on. They were giving me handouts, and I just really wasn't getting on at all well. But I was good at answering. In the end, I started to be able to answer questions that the lecturer was saying. I was a bit of a comedian. I took some of the skills I'd learnt in the senior school, being a bit of a comedian. I took that into the university. I made everybody laugh, and so in the end I fitted in a little bit, and I started to be able to answer the questions as the lecturers were giving to us. And what happened was that I used to write assignments. It used to take me 2 weeks every single day. I'd spend 12 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours a day writing a 2,000 word essay, and I'd hand it in, and the first year I was getting 45, 50%, just scraping a pass. Second year I was working still the same, seven days a week. I'd do 2 weeks solid writing assignments, and other people would write their assignments. They'd write them the night before and they'd hand them in. Some people were even getting 80%. I was envious. I was really, really envious. But they were clever people and they deserved it. And I struggled along, and in the end I managed to just notch the grades up every year. And in my third year at university, we had to do a research project, and I decided to do mine on the subject of dyslexia. It was a 10,000 word assignment, and I spent about 3 months on it, and I put my heart and soul into it and worked really, really hard, and I did a good job and handed it in, and much to my surprise I got 70% for that, and it was the first 70% I'd ever had, the first I'd had in all my life, and I was really happy. And it was at that point, I think, that I decided that I'd like to carry on researching the subject of dyslexia. So I applied for a PhD, to do a PhD, put a proposal together, and decided to do that. Now, when I was doing the third year research on dyslexia, actually, I was doing it on the barriers that youth workers faced in going into college, and I remember reading everything I could on dyslexia. I was interviewing people about their dyslexia, and I remember how did they say, eating, sleeping, drinking, and everything else, dyslexia. And I went through 3 months really intense focusing on dyslexia. And of course I was reflecting on my own dyslexia at the same time also. And I remember going to bed one night after reading as much as I could on the subject of dyslexia, and I went to bed, and about, I'm not sure if it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I just woke up, and in my mind I just saw a table, and actually I could have prepared this earlier. Here it is. I actually wrote down just summed up this table in a diagram. This is the research project that I did. I don't know if you can catch that on the camera. And I just summed up the different stages that somebody goes through as they become aware of their dyslexia. And I came up with 5 different stages. And it was those 5 stages that somebody goes through. I'll just give you a quick overview of those. That's somebody's dyslexic, but they're just unaware that they're dyslexic. Then the next stage they'd move through is, they'd start suspecting that they were dyslexic, but they weren't sure. And the next stage would be somebody who starts acknowledging that they're dyslexic. And the next stage of someone's awareness, as they're becoming more aware of the dyslexia, would be that they accept dyslexia, and they probably stop fighting against it, and then they come out of maybe denial, and they start accepting that label of dyslexia. Then after that, if you keep on becoming more aware of your dyslexia, you'd reach the fifth stage where dyslexia would no longer be an issue to you, and you'd be at a point where you could read, write, engage with literacy. You wouldn't have any difficulty with any of that. And so it was that I based the proposal for the PhD on, and I got accepted at the University of Birmingham to do a PhD on the subject of dyslexia. And I started that, and all I wanted to do really was find, I set out to develop a dyslexia coaching program that would accelerate people through those stages of awareness. So what I wanted to do was find methods, techniques, find strategies, find anything I could to bring somebody from the lower levels of awareness right up to the high levels of awareness, where their dyslexia would no longer be an issue. And I focused on that for the first 2, 3, 4 years of the PhD. And the more I focused on it, the more I reflected on it, and the more I was trying to develop those strategies, the more I noticed that my awareness started to increase. And when I started the PhD, I hadn't long reached the point where I could actually function fully with my own literacy. And when I say fully, I've improved a lot since, but I was good enough to write at an academic level. And I remember that as I started to study, start to focus more and more on dyslexia, I started to increase my levels of awareness, and all of a sudden it was as if another level of awareness existed. And this might sound a bit, I don't know, fanciful or a bit far-fetched, but it was almost like being Keanu Reeves. I know I'm not as good looking as Keanu Reeves, but it was almost like being Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, and it was as if I was stepping out of myself and stepping away from my dyslexia and actually catching glimpses of there perhaps not being any such thing as dyslexia. And this sounds strange because all my life I'd been dyslexic, I'd experienced dyslexia, I'd gone through all the hardship and the pain and the emotional turmoil of being dyslexic. And all of a sudden I'm stepping out of that dyslexic self, and I'm starting to catch glimpses of perhaps that there's that dyslexia maybe has been, I don't know, socially constructed, maybe economic forces, social forces, educational forces, people's perceptions, the political view, everything had just come together and created this thing that we know as dyslexia. And that perhaps this thing that's known as dyslexia might have been imposed on me as I engaged with the education system, as I was learning to read and write, and that I'd internalised it. And perhaps all these years, I was 38 years at the time, 34 actually, when I started to catch glimpses of this, maybe between the age of 34, about 34, 35, started to catch glimpses of this. And so I really started to focus on this, and I went through a period of long walks. I'd disappear on long walks, trying to understand this, trying to make sense of it. I'd stay in bed for 3 or 4 days, and my hair would be all over the place like Einstein's, and I was maybe even losing my mind a little bit, because I knew I was dyslexic. I felt dyslexic, always been proud to be dyslexic, had a really, really strong dyslexia identity, would tell everybody how proud I am to be dyslexic. And all of a sudden I'm starting to panic. My whole identity is going, my whole notion of dyslexia is going, the way I've been perceiving it, my concepts of dyslexia are all starting to blur and not be there any longer. And it took me up to the age of 38 where I was actually finally able to step out of my dyslexia self and become something else. It's almost like a paradox. I knew that I was dyslexic. I had this thing inside me that had been labelled as dyslexic. I'd always felt broken. I always felt there was some deficit or a defect or some form of abnormality inside me. Compared myself with my peers, and I'd really felt this sense of difference. And that was on one side, and it was very paradoxical because on the other side I was actually not dyslexic, and I was trying to grapple with the two, try and balance the two different viewpoints of self, and it was that I really found difficult to do. So what I had to do was try and explain what I'd actually been experiencing for the last 38 years. And that's not easy. So really, what is dyslexia and what had I been experiencing? And I've actually now come up with a theory called the Empowerment Model of Dyslexia, and I've developed this through the PhD study. And I'm now a touch typist. I can write 2,000-3,000 words a day, 4,000 words a day. Probably doesn't make much sense, but I can do that. I can read books. I can skim read a book in a day and get the gist of what that book's about. That isn't an issue for me. What we're actually doing now at Dyslexic Brian, we're looking at those stages and we're putting them into a new thing that we're working on called how to become a black belt in dyslexia. And what we're going to do is have a look and link the first stage as a white belt and then go to the yellow belt and just go through the grades until you become a black belt in dyslexia, where you're able to step free. You become the Keanu Reeves in the Matrix, step free from your dyslexia. You've got a really powerful mindset, a really positive mindset. You're really empowered. You can take control of your thinking. You can take control of your behavior, how you you interact with learning, how you interact with literacy. You just become the powerful dyslexia, because I'm still dyslexic. I've still got a very strong dyslexic identity, but I see my dyslexia now in the way I frame it, and not in the way that was imposed on me or the way I've heard other people talking about dyslexia. So I'm free from my dyslexia. I can achieve whatever I want to achieve. I can gain skills in whatever I want to gain skills in. And that's what we're working on. So if you want to become a black belt in dyslexia, watch the next video. I hope that gives a bit of a context, a bit of a feeling for what lies behind the coaching that we offer at Dyslexic Brian.